Welcome to our Being Your Own CEO Success Circle. This is a support, especially for solopreneurs. We get together because we enjoy each other's company. We love sharing our discoveries with one another. We quite often do some experimentation and learn from each other. I have to say, this morning I learned something from Nathan and something from Vivek already this morning. So you just never know what you're going to learn when you participate in this circle. So this morning we are going to be talking about emotions in communication, and Nathan is going to guide us through that. So we're missing a couple of people this morning who may or may not be able to join us. Vivek is caught up in an important meeting, and Fred is having trouble with his internet connection. So they may or may not join us as we progress through this morning's meeting. But since there's only three of us here, why don't we try introducing ourselves rather than my doing it as a time saver. So Nathan, I'll leave you to last so that you can introduce yourself and then just.
And I hope I haven't misinterpreted what we were going to talk about this morning when you said about emotions. So I'm going, that's different from what I thought I was going to be talking about.
Oh, well.
Well, okay. I mean, emotions do come into this as part, definitely, but it's not necessarily the main focus.
Right
okay.
So, David, why don't you introduce yourself before your phone rings again?
Okay. My name's Dave Flannery. I'm with Affordable Websites for Small Businesses. And I work with small businesses to create their website and provide a web presence for them. Right now, we are broadcasting on YouTube and through the website.
Right on. Thank you for confirming that, David. Appreciate that. And Alana, how are you doing this week? How would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name's Alana Birmingham, coming to you from Ireland. My company is ALB Digital Marketing Solutions, and I help people with their web administration on their websites. I also write copy and social media posting and SEO.
Right on. So I was busy rearranging our Zoom view there while you were speaking. And I see that Javita is out in YouTube land. Good morning and welcome, Javita. And I will introduce myself. I'm Lowell Ann Fuglsang, and I've been moderating this this success circle, I think, for about 5 or 6 years now. I can't believe it. It's just absolutely amazing. But I really like working with solopreneurs who want to experiment and play and or create an online business. So last but not least, we, as I mentioned, we may have some others, but if they're not here to introduce themselves, too bad. So go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, my name is Nathan Segal, originally from Canada, hailing to you from Mexico. And my thing is copywriting, which is salesmanship in print.
Right on. So that's interesting. So what did you title your presentation, Nathan?
How to create long-lasting friendships fast. So, I mean, emotions do come into this, but I thought we were talking about something else. So I guess I misinterpreted somewhere. But what I'm going to be talking about is...
I know you're going to talk, you're going to refer to NLP. I knew that.
Actually, not so much. I mean, there is a strategy that I use which could be taken out of NLP.
Oh.
Actually, yeah. There are a couple of things to do with NLP. One of them is to do with asking questions, careful questions. The other part is active listening, which would also work in with those questions. The other thing I want to that I'll be talking about is how to overcome social anxiety. And that may or may not be an NLP strategy. I mean, NLP goes into so many things. You really, to try and cover everything that you could possibly do. Like I've intended to invent things, which I've later discovered are NLP strategies. So it really depends, but NLP, you can apply it to so many different things. And like I said, you can invent things as I have.
Well, I think we all invent things as we go along, and it's not unusual
We do.
to discover that
No, it's not.
some specialist has discovered it. I know that in my early days, I discovered coaching out of a need that I noticed from the participants in some leadership development work that I was doing. And then, so I was doing all this work by phone, and then sometime later I discovered somebody has discovered coaching and started a whole new discipline. And I had already discovered it. So, that happens to us all quite frequently. So, well, we've got the screen up. So, if you want to share your screen and progress, let's carry on.
Okay, give me a sec here. Just got to figure this out. Oh, share screen. There we go. All right. So hopefully I do this properly. Okay, that's up on screen now. I need to make it full screen. There we go.
Perfect.
So, yeah. Well, I see it. My title goes off over us a little bit, but oh well. But
well,
yeah,
you can move the us around, if you want to.
Yeah, it's not an issue. It's not an issue. It's just a title slide, and if you guys see it, that's all that counts. So, yeah, I titled it about how to create long-lasting relationships fast. So, what I'm going to be covering is networking situations, one-on-one situations, and dealing with the issue of social anxiety, which is something that plagues many people. So the first thing I want to talk about is how to ask questions. And actually, there are two things: how to ask questions and active listening. And then I'll just go into and define those in more detail. So first one up here is how to ask questions. So when you're asking questions, you want to use how, what, where, who, and when. And the one question you never begin or never use is why. And the reason why, bit of a pun there, but the reason why is that if you ask a why question, it tends to put people on the defensive. And you really don't want to do that when you're asking questions. You just want to use the ones that I've listed here and in different combinations to get information. So I'll just get into the next strategy here, which is combined with this thing of asking questions. And that's to do with a technique called active listening. Now, active listening and the questioning, you could use it as part of NLP, you could use it separately. Active listening is something that comes under a number of different categories, but it has to do with asking questions in a particular way. And I learned about active listening a couple of years ago when I was working with a colleague of mine as a podcaster. And what we did, we had a very simple system. We had only two questions, one at the very beginning and one at the end. And at the beginning, we would just do the intro. I would do the intros, and then I would just toss out a question based on the person's biography. And then we would just sit back and we would just listen, the two of us. And then from that listening, what you're doing is when you're doing active listening, you're not doing what many people do when they're in a conversation. Many people, when they're in a conversation, are thinking about what they want to ask next, and they're inwardly focused, and they're not really listening to the person in front of them. And that can create all sorts of problems. But when you're really listening very carefully to the person in front of you, and you use that information to form a question, then it will work better, because you're taking your question out of the content that is right in front of you. Use that to form a question, then you ask that again, and then you sit back and you listen, and you just keep listening and listening, and you keep doing it back and forth. And if you do it for long enough, it's a really great way to create relationships. Now, one of the books out there that talks about this is How to Win Friends and Influence People. There are a couple of stories in there. But one of my favorite stories in the book had to do with this guy who was over in China, and he didn't know very much of the language. And he wound up in a situation where he couldn't speak very much, and he had to listen. And what happened is that he made a whole ton of friends all over the place, because he was spending most of his time listening rather than speaking. And he realized later that by using that technique of listening rather than trying to speak, it creates a situation where the other person really feels heard. And if you do that, it's going to increase the likelihood of better relationships. And I'm going to come back to that in a bit with something else. So now let's have a look here. So social anxiety. So what causes it? And the reason people have this problem called social anxiety is because they're inwardly focused. In other words, anxiety comes from thinking about, oh my God, what are they going to think of me? Is my clothing too shabby? Are my shoes scuffed? What if I trip over my words? And they're just creating this inward dialogue, and they're creating all sorts of difficulties for themselves that actually don't exist. And in reality, in a social situation, nobody's really going to be looking at you or caring about you. You may think they are, but they probably won't be. Not unless you've got something really different going on, like a bright yellow shirt or something like that makes you stand out, or wearing some sort of elaborate costume that draws attention. But chances are, a lot of people aren't going to notice you all that much, because they're going to be focused on themselves and the people they're with and so on. So what I want to talk about is how to create friendships when you're at a social networking event, and to beat this thing called social anxiety. So the way to beat the social anxiety is, instead of focusing inwardly on yourself, you turn your attention outwards and you focus on the people in front of you. So if you're at a social networking event and you want to meet people, you want to get into conversations. Oh yeah, and I need to step back for a second here. One of the worst mistakes you can make is just going around handing out your business card. A lot of people do that, and they think that's the way it's supposed to happen, but that's really not a good way of doing things. So I'd like to outline what I do, what I actually do when I go to a social networking event. And what I'm doing is I walk around the room and I'm just listening for different conversations, listening for different topics, things that people might be talking about that might interest me. So we'll say, for the sake of discussion, I encounter a group of people and they're talking about solar energy, which is one of my favorite topics. But I don't just jump in. I just stand there and listen for a few minutes, listen to what they're talking about. And then what I would do is, from that discussion, I would create a question and then ask it of people there. And when somebody turns to me to speak to me, that's when I employ the active listening that I spoke about earlier, and really listen and focus all my attention on that person and to what they're saying, so that I can formulate the question. And when you do that, if you're suffering from social anxiety, if you do that and you focus all your attention on the people in front of you, and you don't let yourself go into any of your stories, you just focus on those people in front of you, you do it long enough, you won't have social anxiety anymore, because it will dissolve. Because you'll be focusing on people, you'll be asking careful questions, you'll be listening. You do that long enough, and you do it a number of times in social situations, your social anxiety will be a thing of the past. It's really that easy. And a lot of people think it's difficult, but it's not. It has to do with that story. Turn that story around 180 degrees, focus on other people, do it for long enough, and you won't have any more anxiety. So the last thing I want to talk about is how to make friends in a one-on-one situation. So there are a couple of different ways that this could come about. And one way is if you're introduced to somebody and you through some sort of mutual connection, and you say, oh, so-and-so is into blah, blah, blah. And that gives you your lead in. And so in a case like that, it's really easy because you just start asking the person questions based on the introduction. And it's a really great way of getting to know somebody. But let's say you're in an event, let's say you, well, a really simple example is actually you see somebody, you want to talk to that person, but you don't know anything about them. And what I typically do is I just hang back and I study that person, and I see and I look for visual clues that I can use to start up a conversation. So for example, the person might be working on a MacBook Air, or they might be sitting in a particular way. They might be wearing a certain type of clothing. They might be reading a particular kind of book. They might have a type of cologne or perfume that you really like. And so what I'm doing when in situations like that is I'm looking for a conversational starter, a way to break the ice. And so let's say, go back to my first example, somebody's working on a MacBook Air and I recognize that. And so a way to begin a conversation is, I see you're working on a MacBook Air. How do you like it? And it's a very simple thing, but it's a great way to open a conversation. And this is something I've been doing for many years. And if you were to look at, and this is a bit of a segue, but the way that I was learning about some of this stuff was at one point I wanted to meet women. So I was going out and I was doing different things. And I started reading about these guys who call themselves pickup artists. And at one point, I watched a video presentation by a guy who called himself Mystery. And he explained 11 different points that the pickup artists use in order to meet women and create conversation. And much to my amazement, I was using 8 of them naturally. But you see, I function from a different space. I don't come from with the idea of canned things or magic tricks. I look for things in the environment. And if you're in a situation where you want to meet somebody, say a business meeting, you look at the person and you study them and you look for different things. You look for visual clues that will give you an opening that you can pull out of thin air. And I've been doing this for years and it works beautifully. So anyway, that's pretty much it for my presentation. Any questions?
Any questions for Nathan? Well, one thing I can attest to is the questioning and the active listening are the basic tools of coaching. Those are the things.
Perfect.
Those are the things that you're doing when you're working with somebody who is trying to move forward or etc. However, when you said never use the word why or the question why, and I remember reading that and understanding the principle about why it was suggested not to use it.
Mm-hmm.
But I found other ways to put my question so that I got to the why rather than saying why are you doing, because you're right,
Cool.
that
Okay.
that brings an anxiety to people that feel as though they have to justify.
It puts them on the spot.
Yeah. So
Yeah, very cool.
what I discovered was, could you explain to me maybe how you arrived at that?
Yeah.
I see somebody is just coming in here. And so when you want to know why or whatever, there are other ways to get at that information without actually using the word why. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, there are. It takes quite a bit of practice. I mean, in terms of the NLP thing, I was talking with a coach that I know about this, and he was saying to me, you just need to practice it. You've got to keep doing it with different people, and you keep listening and listening and listening, and eventually you get better at it. Now, that same coach was also my partner for doing the podcasts, And we got to a point where we were just trading off with each other and asking questions. And it was a system that worked extremely well. So typically, like I said at the beginning, I would just introduce who we were, uh, and then introduce our speaker. And then I would take a question that I'd pre-created, which I would throw out, and then that's when we would just hang back and listen. And at the end of every podcast, I would say to the person, we've covered a lot here, and I was just wondering, is there anything else that you would like to talk about that we haven't addressed with these questions? And inevitably, boom, it opened the floodgates, and we wound up with a lot of great information.
Yeah.
The other thing that happened is because we were practicing this active listening, we made a lot of friends.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of people afterwards who would say to us, love the interview with you guys. How can I help you?
Mm-hmm.
How can I help you, support you guys and get the word out? It was really awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's it does take practice, so you're right.
Oh yeah, lots of it.
Yeah.
Lots of it.
Yeah.
And we screwed up quite a bit at the beginning before we finally got the formula, but the active listening was one of the very best things I ever learned as far as doing interviews.
Mm-hmm.
Once I learned that, everything became easy. But like I said, we didn't have, with the exception of the opening and closing question, we had nothing prepared in the middle, and we just flew by the seat of our pants, and it worked just fine every time.
Right on. So I see David has his hand raised. And,
Yes,
and before you ask, David, I want to say hi to Jay, who just arrived, and Javita, who's out there in YouTube land, has also said hi to Jay. Okay, go ahead, David.
Mine's more of a comment. I'm dealing with a very young man. He's probably about 20 years old, and he's a used car salesman, and we're selling his home, and he's purchasing another one through us. The thing I noticed about this young man is he listens. My wife told me when we got out of the car, hey, I do not want to spend a lot of time talking to him. And I made the comment back, he never says very much. He just listens to us. If you don't want to talk a lot, just don't talk a lot. Be done with the conversation. But he's using, I can see he's using that for his sales. And it's something that we both need to learn better, because
it's extremely powerful if you do it, because you do it the right way. The prospect will actually talk themselves into buying from you without you saying all that much. It's like when you make a pitch at some point, for when you ask for the order, close your mouth and don't say anything. First person to speak loses, is what I've learned about that. And you just keep your mouth shut and just wait. And it's hard to wait because sometimes there's a long gap, but you got to force yourself to wait.
So that was one of my questions, going to be, what happens if they don't respond to it? You give them a question and they more or less say yes or no, but because you don't ask yes or no questions.
Well,
But,
you have
but
to.
they just answer it in as few words as they possibly can, and then you're sitting there waiting.
Well, if they answer even in a few words, you still have an answer, which gives you something that you can use to form the next question.
Okay.
If there's a problem in the conversation, you might address that and saying, it makes me wonder if I'm asking the right questions, because you're not giving me much information. And I'm just wondering if there's something going on that I've missed. Sometimes if you address it directly, it really helps, because if you address it directly, the person might say, oh, it's true. I'm really nervous and I'm not very comfortable talking a lot. And they'll give you information, but the key with a lot of this stuff is you have to ask. If you don't ask, you're not going to find out. And sometimes you will find in a conversation that it simply doesn't work. Because part of what's going on, like from an NLP perspective, one of the things you're trying to create is rapport. And sometimes it doesn't work very well. So if you're in a situation where you're having trouble with rapport, then I would recommend a technique called mirroring, if you don't know of it. So you're sitting there, I can't get much visual clues from you in terms of what you're doing, except for that movement that you just made a little moment ago where you just went like that. So I could do that, but it's hard for me to get visual clues from you except to just sit more or less in the same posture as you. The other way of mirroring, which a lot of people don't think about, is listening to the way that you speak and mirroring that. So if you speak fast, I speak fast. You speak slow, I speak slower. And it's all about that kind of thing. And you can do that on video. It just takes practice. And the more closely that you can observe those clues, look for them, and then mirror that back, that will help you a lot with gaining rapport.
I see.
I'm going to make mirroring challenging for you, Nathaniel.
Yeah.
Or Nathan. I'll spin this
I
around.
I didn't catch that. Oh, sure. Well, I suck at this, but I'll try. I just absolutely suck at stuff like this. Okay, well.
The Lynn doesn't like me playing with a pen, so
I'll just do this. But Jay, my friend, you have a wee bit of the shit disturber in you.
No kidding.
But I've known that about you since day one, so I mean.
I'm very familiar with mirroring and how it's effective in terms of using it for communication and basically leading the path and building rapport and trust and whatnot. So it's actually used quite often in an interrogation with the law enforcement. So I mean, something as rudimentary as body language can be extremely effective. I mean, it's not as effective with a virtual meeting, but it can be, but like when I was talking about the pen, when I was doing the pen, I know, like, I learned something many moons ago about conducting meetings and being in control of the meeting, and something as simple as having a pen in your hand versus a pencil can be very effective in terms of getting people to listen to you, because it's a very subtle thing. A pen is permanent, a pencil is not. A pencil, you can erase it and whatnot. So it's something as subtle as having a pen in your hand when you're talking to someone. If you want to say, like, David wants someone to sign an agreement on the house or something like that.
And you've got a pen in your hand as a way of creating an anchor.
Yeah, exactly.
Of signing the agreement.
Yeah.
So, and
using it to point and stuff like that, and using hand gestures with the pen is quite effective. So
that's interesting.
Just don't have two pens in each hand. So that's then becomes bizarre.
So Jay, when you've got a pen in your hand and you're going like this, is this the message that you're really nervous? Or you're getting bored and you want to move on quickly? Like, I mean, there are lots of ways to interpret that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a distraction mode. It's like, here, stop talking and listen to what look at me.
Yeah.
It's the only child in me who needs the attention.
Yeah.
Right. There was another device that I used, like when I did those slides. Unlike many people when they do slides, and I learned this from a speaker a number of years ago, actually what he would do is make the slides super simple with maybe only 2 or 3 words, as opposed to what I did, which was fairly elaborate. But I try to keep the amount of words down as much as possible. And like what he was doing, actually, which I did not do, and I just thought about it, is he would have the slide up just long enough so people would register the topic. Then he would turn the screen off and you focus on him. And he talks about whatever that topic is. And then when he wants to do the next part of the presentation, he brings the slide up again. So that was another strategy. Another thing that I sometimes do when I'm talking about something, I say, well, and just like that, if I can get my fingers to snap, that's creating an anchor to illustrate a point so that people remember it. So there are all sorts of cool visual. Well, there's another thing that I learned, but I can't really tell you how I learned it. It happened naturally through this coach I was working with. That the technique is conversational hypnosis, and it has to do with leading and pacing. And if you're listening to somebody who knows how to do that, like one of the things that I've been doing, like I said, mirroring and rapport. And at one point, I was doing some recordings, but I was also following some spiritual teachers that I really liked. And I remember listening to one of my recordings after it was done. I was playing back and I was doing something else in the room. And I was listening to the recording and I thought, geez, I sound like Adyashanti. I was using the same pacing, the same pauses, the same way of speaking, all of that. So if you're wanting to create a particular style where you come across in a particular way, and you know somebody who's doing that, somebody that you study, you mirror them, and eventually you start taking on those characteristics.
Well, the other thing, and going back to David's question about, what do you do when somebody maybe comes back with a very minimal answer, is to as you said, let the pause be there, and then just simply say, can you say more about that?
Yeah, there was one that I learned from a woman the other day that I was talking to, which I thought was a brilliant question. And says, and what have you not told me so far? Which I thought, oh, that's cool. I like that. Another thing that I learned is from a podcaster. His name is David Warner. He runs a site called Mixergy. And the thing that he would do to really get to the meat of something is he would say, what's the number one, and then whatever that is. And I've used that a number of times in my interviews, and it's worked. It's been gold. It's a really great question.
Another one that I've noticed is if somebody's only got a few things to say, and you sort of are trying to get them to open up, and they say a few more words, you can say, is there a story behind that? Like, tell me what your experience in that was.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are, again, but it's all about actively listening, like being really focused on that person. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really interesting thing, because I was listening to somebody, was watching an interview. I believe it was Jeff Dunham, who's a famous comedian. And it was another comedian by the name, he calls himself Fluffy. He weighs about 450 pounds. He's this Mexican comedian. But he was talking about wanting to meet Arnold Schwarzenegger. And there was an event, and he actually got introduced to Arnold, and he said, this guy is just unbelievable as somebody to meet in a social gathering, because the thing you said was just what you said. He turned all his attention on me, and he was just solidly focused on me for the entire, it was like nobody else was there. And it's a really awesome technique to use.
It is. So, Alana, I saw you with your hand up there.
Sorry, I was trying to find the unmute button there. I guess while you guys were talking, what occurred to me was trying to get someone to open up that doesn't really want to open up. Like, you come across people who, you start asking them questions, however mundane or benign they might be, and they kind of get defensive. So if you're trying to conduct business with someone that, is a bit closed off, I think that's more of a challenge. I don't know how you get through that.
Again, by asking questions, by saying something like, I've been watching what's happening, or I've been listening to you, and I think you might be a little bit uncomfortable with the questions I'm asking. Is there something going on that I need to know about? And, in some of those situations where I've had that, the person will come back and say, I'm really not comfortable with this. I don't like this. Or not every situation that you get into is going to work. There are going to be some disconnects. So, like, I had a situation years ago where I wound up in a Starbucks, and I wound up talking with this woman. And I realized after a while that I really didn't like her, and I didn't want to continue the conversation. So I was thinking, well, what do I do? And then I did a couple of NLP techniques to break rapport. And I just jumped up and I said, oop, got to use the washroom. And I took off. When I came back, she was gone. So there are times when breaking rapport and changing the dynamics is absolutely necessary. It just depends. Not every situation is going to work. And if it doesn't work, you say, okay, give it a good shot. Not the right person for you. And that happens.
I think the other thing that I've noticed is when you ask closed questions is usually when people
Yeah, that's right. That's a good point.
and it's so easy when, like, especially when you're trying to gather information. It's so easy to fall into the trap of asking closed questions, and that is, there's nothing that will shut somebody down faster than a series of closed questions. They know it because it gives the message that you're not really interested in them. All you want is the information they have.
Okay, so just for everybody here, I'm sure some people don't know what those are. Can you give some examples of closed questions?
Where do you live?
Ah,
What's your phone number?
got it.
What kind of a thing do you drive? What kind of a car do you drive? Yeah. So I mean,
Right.
there's a closed question usually only has one very short answer.
Got it. As opposed to, I've heard that you live in this beautiful town in Illinois. Can you tell me what it's like there? What's the weather like there?
Yeah.
So that would be an example of an open question where they
Yeah.
go, oh, well, it's blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or whatever made you decide to move there?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
what attracted you to?
I listened to the
living-
way that you said that. I thought, ooh, well, I'm not sure I want to tell you now.
Well,
Am I going to get judged for that?
it depends on how it started, how the thing started.
I know, but I'm
So,
teasing you because
yeah.
I can.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean it's and the thing is I learned this business of open and closed questions.
Yes, that's good.
In the whole employment world, where I was expected to work with somebody within a half hour. I had a half hour time slot to speak with somebody. I had to get a certain amount of information from them. I had to also create some kind of rapport so that person would relax. There were all these factors, but the piece that I discovered was, if you start with an open question that relates to that person specifically, and then introduce the fact that you have to ask a bunch of very specific questions in order to do whatever, and just say, let's see if we can get through these specific questions in a hurry, because I'd like to learn more about you or whatever. So
That's cool. I like that.
There are lots of different ways, but and even in the sales situation, I mean, there are situations where you do need to ask closed questions.
Of course.
So if you're in that situation, the better way is to begin with open questions and then say, let's see if we can share some information quickly here, and then let's move on to whatever. So
I like the way you framed that,
tricky.
Lolan. That's well, I mean, the way
tricky.
the way you just framed it is really, really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know the difference between the open and closed, and you frame it in such a way so that the person knows what's going on before you get into it, so they don't get defensive. You disarm them, if you will. You disarm them before any of that can happen, so that you know what's going to happen. They're ready for it, and then you just go into it and then you say, "Thank you for answering these questions. Ready to move on," and then you launch into an open question.
Tell me about such and such or whatever.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I really like this.
Yeah.
So guess what? I learned something from you today. My turn. No, it's really good. I really like it. It's something I had never thought about. So.
Well, and it goes back to understanding that every person has a story. There's a story about every person.
Yeah.
So if you can find different ways to indicate that you're really interested in their story.
Yeah.
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 So yeah, the whole employment world. I mean, my job was to find out. I mean, quite often because they wanted access to a course, or they wanted training, or they wanted something. So in order for me to even be able to approve that, which I could do, there were certain things that I needed to know, certain pieces of information I needed in order to make that decision.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I
Yeah.
mean, it's interesting because a day or two ago, I was reading something about a sales process, and like Alana was talking about wanting to have a session about copywriting. And I was originally thinking about, well, there's a standard way of doing this, but as of late, I've learned about, whoops, somebody's got a phone going. But I've learned about a couple of different ways of creating that conversation where it's not complicated at all.
Mhm.
And one of them I learned from a friend of mine who's a copywriter, who's very successful at it. And then there was another strategy I learned about as a way of being able to do sales. And yes, there's copywriting in it, but it's unbelievably simple. And when I saw it, I felt like somebody had given me the keys to the kingdom. So there are so many different ways of looking at this stuff.
Mhm.
There isn't only one way. There's some people, depending on their mindset, who will say, well, there's only one way to do this. But in the real world, unless you're building a rocket, perhaps, and you have to build something a certain way, and that's the only way you can do it, and that you're stuck. But if you're doing other things, depending on what they are, of course, there might be a lot of options.
Yeah, that's for sure. So I'm going back to Alana's question.
Yeah.
I mean, if you run into somebody that you don't want to do business with, the sure way to get rid of them is to give them a whole series of closed questions.
Yeah, that's one way of doing it, or just
you can use it in different ways.
yeah, there is that approach, but also to tell the truth, as I have a number of times in different sessions to say, I've been listening to what you have to say, and I have to tell you, based on your responses, I know I'm not the right person for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I've done that a few times. I don't like doing it, but there are times when I know I have to. Like, I was actually doing an interview with a guy, and it was an interview where the guy had been buried alive, quite literally, when a building collapsed, and he got rescued after something like 6 days or whatever it was. And I was waiting for a really dynamic story, and the guy spoke in a total monotone without much inflection at all. And I had to tell him, something, this interview is not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
You're about as lifeless as something dead on the ground. There's no inflection in your voice. There's no life. I can't use this interview, and I'm going to have to end this call.
Mm-hmm.
And I did say that to him, and he was probably shocked out of his boots, but I said, you have no dynamics. You have no life. It's like you just died, or you're close to death or something. It's just, I can't make this work. I can't use it. I'm sorry.
Hmm.
Hopefully that changed his dynamics after that, but it was just an absolute dud.
Hmm. Well, I don't know that I would be as upfront if
I had to be,
with
because
my
I knew.
thinking. I don't. That wouldn't be my style.
Well, we all have different styles,
Yeah, we
but
do.
I
Yeah.
was interviewing this guy for a podcast, and I knew that if I put this live, I'd lose the entire audience. They wouldn't listen to this guy. He was
Mhm.
boring in every way. It was just like,
Mm.
wow, you would think something like that would change you, and obviously it did, but it's turned you into a robot, right?
Mm.
Anyway,
Well, doing
things happen.
doing interviews is another dynamic altogether,
Oh yeah,
and I've done a few, and I actually love doing them because it allows you to really bring out your own curiosity
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically the way you make an interview work. But I also found that it helped the person prepare if you did give them a few ideas of what you might ask ahead of time. So to give them a
Yeah.
chance to think it through.
There are lots of different
Yeah.
ways. I found that with what we were doing, that's what worked the best for us.
Mm-hmm.
And going forward, like there are some people though, like there's a guy, I don't remember his name, but his podcast is Entrepreneur on Fire. And he has a preset series of questions that he asks each participant. And it goes into a half-hour format that he rigidly sticks to. And
Mm-hmm.
that works for him.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to be more fluid. I like it better when I do it that way. It may be longer,
Mm-hmm.
but I tend to get better information if I
Mm-hmm.
leave it open to a degree.
Yeah. Conversational.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we are a good 15 minutes over our half hour, our target half hour.
Big
So
surprise.
I see David is on the phone. He's in the middle of a real estate deal, so I know why that has happened. And um, Jay had to drop off probably for the same reason.
Yeah.
Life and work happens. So
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
For sure.
So Alana, any parting comment or question before I start us toward the ending?
No, but it's been a very interesting discussion. So it's, given me a few ideas myself. So yeah, thank you, Nathan.
Yeah,
Welcome.
right on. So thanks for sharing your observations, Nathan. And I will just say that we are about to close. And so I will remind you that it's important to do what you love with passion. And I always giggle to myself when I say that because I had a friend in Yellowknife who used to phone me up and identify herself as saying, "This is Passionate Louise speaking."
Okay. That's bizarre, but okay.
That was her way of making fun of my my little my
Oh,
tagline.
I see. So she's taking the piss out of you, eh?
Yeah. Yes, the last thing I probably need to mention is our planned topic for next time. There's a new Google product called Keen. And I've noticed it. I've been in and kind of looking at it a little bit. I will do a little bit more looking and come back and share what I discovered. So hope to see everyone again next week, and thanks for joining us. And I will do my Alt 6, no Alt 4.